Anything goes in this playground of destruction. You are a lethal mercenary. Your mission is to topple a sinister military regime by any means necessary. Steal weapons, hijack vehicles, and call in air support. Anything it takes to make your money. But this regime isn't going quietly. They'll throw everything they have at you, whether it be conventional or nuclear. This is Mercenaries, Playground of Destruction.
Welcome folks, I'm Livid. Mercenaries Playground of Destruction is an action and adventure video game developed by Pandemic Studios and published by LucasArts for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox, originally released in January of 2005. Hey, LucasArts, I wonder what happened to them.
Alright now, get out there and make me some goddamn money!
Rest in peace. Pandemic Studios was the company that also made Destroy All Humans, The Lord of the Rings Conquest, and Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2. Those are all titles I played like crazy back in the day. It wasn't until I got older that I started paying attention to specific studios and who made what. I now realize Pandemic gave me some of my favorite games of the 2000s. I mean, come on, Galactic Conquest on Star Wars Battlefront, I played that for days. Mercenaries was a game I loved playing as a kid, and I wanted to replay it since its 20-year anniversary was in January of 2025. Let's talk about my biases. As I said, I loved playing this game as a kid. Ever since I was young, I've always loved history, war, maps, and geopolitics. Mercenaries Playground of Destruction wasn't like any other game I had played before, and seemed to have all those elements crammed into one game. It was also true to its name. It was a total playground of destruction. It's a sandbox open world war game where everything you see could be completely blown to hell, and the manner in which you did it was totally your choice. I was going to replay it on my old 360, but when I turned it on, it sounded like a jet engine taking off and got really hot within minutes. So I decided to play it on my Xbox One, and it worked great. I did love this game back then, so that should be known up front, and it will affect my analysis playing it again these days. Although I'll do my best to be as objective as possible. This game's setting focuses on a somewhat realistic potential war on the Korean Peninsula in 2009. Since this game came out in 2005, this is like a it could really happen someday type thing. It's important for me to give some background on Korea because I think it's valuable to this playing experience. I think the gameplay is great, but I also love the setting and I want to set the stage for why I like it so much. By the end of the Second World War, Japanese-occupied Korea was divided up along the 38th parallel between the winners of the Second World War. The South, occupied by American forces, had set up the Republic of Korea, or ROK, with a capitalist economic structure. And the North, occupied by the Soviet Union, who installed a communist state known as a Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK. In 1950, the Korean War started when the Soviet-backed DPRK sought to kick the American-backed Southern government out for good and unify the peninsula under communism. This war was back and forth and ended up being a quagmire for all countries involved. It dragged in a United Nations army, which of course included the United States, but also many other countries. After nearly being kicked off the peninsula, the Southern forces fought all the way back to the northern border with China. And that did not sound good to the Chinese. China didn't want Western-friendly neighbors on their border, and entered the war themselves to prevent North Korea from losing the war. But by 1953, all sides were exhausted and just wanted the war to be over. As insane as it sounds, the war basically just put the borders back to almost exactly how they were prior to the war starting. This game focuses on the DPRK, but I'm going to say North Korea for now on, just to simplify things. North Korea is currently ran by Kim Jong-un, the third Kim to hold that post. But it was his grandfather Kim Il-sung who ran the country initially until he died in 1994. The country was then handed to his son, Kim Jong-il. Kim Jong-il would have been in charge back in 2005 when this game came out. Under the Kims, North Korea has lived under a brutally repressive regime with a massive list of human rights abuses over the decades. But these Kims don't actually exist in this game. They're replaced by Choi Kim and his son, Choi Song. What does exist, however, is pretty much everything else. A brutally repressive regime that is incredibly paranoid about another war with Western forces. Since the end of the First Korean War, North Korea has been preparing for the next war, turning their small mountainous country into an absolute buzzsaw, full of bunkers, fortresses, and a fanatical regime wielding Soviet-era technology that is dated but absolutely still dangerous. And even if a country managed to handle all of that, they still have nuclear weapons. Weapons that are so strong they could destroy entire cities in a few seconds. It's been decades of this back and forth with South Koreans and Americans. The North Korean people have suffered too much. President Choi Kim decides to negotiate with the South Korean government in order to peacefully unify the country. But his son, General Song, is not having it. He's an ultra-nationalist believer in the Juche ideology and sees this as a weak surrender to the Western imperialists. He initiates a coup and kills his own father to become the glorious leader. General Song rolls back all the progress his father made towards unification. He refuses all foreigners and nuclear inspections. The country goes dark.
Reports from Pyongyang indicate North Korean military forces have staged a violent coup.
The Royal Australian Navy intercepted a North Korean freighter.
Authorities alerted after uncovering a cache of nuclear warheads in the ship's cargo bay. The warheads were intended for sale to known terrorist elements.
Troops poured across the DMZ and into North Korea, intent on dislodging the newly installed regime of General Song. The president today reaffirmed the need for this peacekeeping mission.
The general posted bounties today for the latest deck of 52.
The Second Korean War has started. You play as a ruthless mercenary working for the company X-Ops. You have 3 playable character options. Jennifer Mui, I don't know if I'm saying that right, is British and been with the company the longest. Matthias Nielsen is Swedish and has actually only been with the company for 1 year. Then there's Chris Jacobs. He's American and been with the X-Ops company for 5 years. There are slight differences with all of these characters. Jennifer can speak Chinese, Matthias speaks a little bit of Russian, and Chris speaks Korean. These offer up some different dialogue options and quips throughout the game, but largely the game and story play out the same. I ended up choosing Chris because I used to choose Matthias as a kid and I wanted to try someone else out. You're given a brief explanation of the situation on the ground. There is a $100 million bounty for General Song. Inflation's been rough the past couple years, but not that rough. $100 million is still a lot of money today. X-Ops is just a company. They're not the one waging the war though. The South Koreans, Chinese, allied nations, and even the Russian mob are all stepping in to get a slice of the pie. And it's not just Song either. He has an entire regime. So that means his lieutenants are strewn about, causing havoc for the occupation forces all over the country. They're known as the Deck of 52. But you're unique in that you're just a dirty mercenary. You can work with these factions and play them against each other in order to get the money, supplies, and intel you'll need to capture General Song. And I can tell you firsthand, that's exactly how being a mercenary or contracting works. Now, I wasn't kicking in doors and shooting guns, but I was a contractor for several years. Prior to that, I was in the United States Navy. I was a bomb detection canine handler in both settings, but they are vastly different from each other. In the military, you're doing it for a multitude of reasons. You want to serve your country, see the world, or just get college paid for. For the most part, it's noble reasons. As a mercenary or contractor, you're in it for the money. There isn't much nobility in it, but hey, the company you work for is doing the same thing you are and doesn't give a damn about you. You're going to the highest bidder. This game nails that aspect. It doesn't matter what your character's nationality is. They all want their money and they'll work with anybody to get it. So that gives your character an aspect that the other factions can't really do. X-Ops wants in on that 100 million and sends in a single operative to go find Song. You're informed of the situation on ground and flown in at a rapid pace. As soon as you're dropped into the country, everything is just kicking off. You're right on the demilitarized zone, or DMZ. This is where the border went back to at the end of the First Korean War in 1953. You're given a PDA, which will be vital to everything about this game. You need it to call in support and airstrikes, review your map and locations of Deck of 52 members, and read emails. Combat is in third person. You can carry only 2 weapons at a time, but can pick up enemy weapons whenever you find them. Vehicles are another big part of this game. You could take them off friendly forces or enemy forces, but also call them in yourself. Driving and flying are absolutely essential to this game, but I'll get more into that a little bit later. Once you've done the first few missions of the game, it's entirely open to you. Go anywhere and do what you want. Almost everything in this game is destructible. Vehicles, fuel tanks, buildings, entire cities really. Hurting civilians will give you a hefty fine and cause serious penalties with most of the factions though. The core gameplay is about hunting down Deck of 52 members. They all have individual bounties to collect on. They can be caught alive for the full payout or just straight up killed, but you'll only get half of the payment. Catching them alive offers its own difficulty for extra cash. Allied Nation air support needs to be called in to collect that deck member, but that can be easier said than done. Sometimes you're under a hail of gunfire and they'll refuse to fly in until the area is clear. Other times, the area is somewhat clear until the helicopter is taken out by enemy anti-air weapons. You can keep calling them in, but you'll foot the bill if there's any issues, whether it's your fault or not. And it's not just money you collect from the deck members. They also provide intel. Intel will help you extend up the pyramid of power, leading to the more and more powerful people within the regime and ultimately General Song. The main enemies of this game are the North Korean army. They are hostile to all factions involved and there is no negotiating with them. They can be found all over the country, but they have mainly taken defensive positions in mountainous areas or built up defensive compounds. But that doesn't mean you won't find them on road patrols or occupying some portions of cities. But those areas are harder to control when you have several different huge countries invading you and controlling the skies. I really like this aspect of the game because it makes sense. If you're surrounded on all sides with no friends, you can't realistically expect to hold all of your territory. It makes it feel like the North Korean army is waging a guerrilla war campaign. And the fact that these hardened structures are all over the country makes sense. North Korea has had almost 60 years by this time in the game to build and prepare for the next war with the evil imperialist dogs. One of their main holdouts in the game is an area called the Black Gate, a massive, imposing fortress. It kind of reminds me of Return of the King when they go to confront Sauron at Mordor. The Deck of 52 is a reference to a similar scheme during the American invasion of Iraq. During that conflict, coalition soldiers were given playing cards of different members of Saddam Hussein's regime. This was used because Iraq was pretty quickly conquered conventionally by coalition forces, but Saddam and other members of his government went into hiding, swearing to wage a guerrilla war blended amongst the civilians. Saddam was eventually found, and I'm not sure how effective these playing cards were in his capture or capture of other members of his regime, but the concept is fun and works well in a video game setting. The Deck of 52 in this game are for General Song's regime, and they aren't just military members. All deck members have short bios you can read explaining what they do for the regime. Some are just artillery experts. Others procure drugs, weapons, nuclear material, or even people. This is a reference to how things work in the real North Korea. They're a heavily sanctioned country that isn't very wealthy and only trades with a few other countries. Their regime has resorted to black market tactics and other forms of nefarious money generating schemes to keep the pockets of the regime lined with cash. These may be short bios, but they add so much for me. They give context to what they're on the list for. Depending on what they provide to the regime, it motivates me to find and stop them. It feels like you're getting someone really dangerous out of the war and chipping away at the regime structure. There are even different references that Song is trying to remain in hiding so he can't really communicate with his entire army. That means the deck members have to act independently to wage the war. Most of these deck members can be found on your own free adventures, or the different factions you work for can tip you off to the other members. Just like a deck of cards, there are also aces. The aces in these games refer to who controls a pyramid of lieutenants below them. When you go after aces, they're involved in more structured story missions. They can't be found on the normal map like other deck members. They're usually off on some secluded island map you're dropped off at, and you can hunt them down with the same rules that apply with killer capture. I like these set piece battles a lot because they design some really interesting areas and situations. It breaks up the pace a bit from the stuff you've been seeing on the normal map and gives you something new to check out. There are only 4 of these missions and they all progress the story even further. The last ace mission, of course, being the Ace of Spades, which is General Song. With so many North Korean forces and deck members to take down, we need allies. You have to work with several different factions in order to accomplish your goals. The major factions you work with in this game are the Allied nations, the Chinese, the South Koreans, and the Russian Mafia. Not all of these factions get along, and sometimes doing missions for one will put you into direct conflict with the other. Balancing all of these factions to get what you want out of them is very important. If you piss one off enough, they'll be hostile to you, literally shooting you on sight if they see you. You can recover their opinion of you by paying off one of their officials or even just killing enough of their enemies in front of them. They offer vital intel to hunt down deck members, but they also gradually offer you material support in the form of supplies, vehicles, and airstrikes. When you get into vehicles, they're designated by a faction, to include civilian. After a few seconds of being one of these vehicles, you will now be designated under that faction. So if you get in a North Korean vehicle and drive around, other North Koreans will think you're one of them and not shoot at you. And if you want nobody to shoot at you, you drive around as a civilian. But if an enemy officer sees you, or you honk your horn, or you attack one of their soldiers, they can identify you and who you are. It will ruin your disguise. The Allied nations are led by Colonel Samuel Garrett. They're basically the Americans and their allies, but have an aesthetic look to the United Nations peacekeeping forces with their blue helmets. Their goals in this war are pretty much just to remove General Song from power and ensure he doesn't launch their nuclear weapons. Although the real-world America is allied to South Korea, the allied nations in this game doesn't really seem to care about unifying the peninsula under the Korean government or anything. The big value you bring to them is that their hands are tied by politicians back at home. There's a bunch of red tape. You have to cut through it because they aren't able to take all the necessary actions a war demands. They could just slide you some money and you can get your hands dirty for them. They are the most technologically advanced faction in this game and are able to hand over most of the satellite and intelligence technology over to you when working for them. Using their technology comes at a pretty steep price though. The planes and bombs they use are really expensive and therefore you have to pay for all that fancy tech when you call them in. While expensive, their airstrikes are also the most accurate, helping you avoid civilian casualties or killing deck members you want to survive. They enforce a very strict no-fly zone over the entire country and its border, with their planes flying constantly overhead. They are also the gatekeepers to all of the aces in the Deck of 52, and you need allied nation clearance in order to go after them once you've gained enough intel. The South Koreans are led by Agent Buford of the CIA, but not officially, of course. Major Park is officially in control of the South Korean forces. Their goal is to seek unification with the North, which makes sense, but they have some enemy factions that don't want to see the Northern status quo disappear. They have similar small arms and vehicle capabilities as the AN forces, which makes sense since America is their longtime partner. But they offer virtually no airstrike support and focus mainly on supply and manpower aspects. When you initially meet the South Koreans, you participate in the Battle of Kaesong, which is a really fun mission where you stop the North Koreans from trying to retake that city. When it comes to my personal faction goals and who I want to see succeed, I personally align with the South Koreans the most. I want to see them unify their country. I don't know, I figure ultimately they are all the Korean people, that they should probably be under one country. It's better to unify and solve their issues amongst themselves rather than stay separated and have different powers influencing them separately. The Chinese People's Liberation Army are led by Xiaopeng, who has set up his headquarters at the Pyongyang airport. He's not a big fan of Westerners and talks a lot of smack about dirty mercenaries like us and the evils of Western civilization. China is just across the border of North Korea, and just like in the 1950s, they have no interest in having a Western-influenced country on their border, so they intervene to exert their influence. But Peng isn't shy about exactly what they want. China wants to entirely take control of North Korea as a new province of China. The Chinese are also known for their artillery, and that's what they offer in this game when you work for them. When working for the Chinese, you participate in the Battle of Nampo. I love this mission because the devs really sold the experience on this one. Nampo is an important harbor and fuel refinery area still occupied by the North Korean army forces. It's vital to the Chinese staying in the fight, being able to drop off thousands of troops by boat and supply them with fuel. As you travel to Nampo, there are unique roadblocks and Chinese forces building up for the battle. You're sent in to cause enough chaos and confuse the North Korean forces so that Chinese forces can mop up and occupy the city. And the mission pretty much plays out just like that. As you destroy more and more North Korean units, the Chinese armor will start rolling in and crushing the final elements of resistance. I love how that played as a mission. It's only scripted in very slight ways, showing you the PLA building up on Nampo's borders. Then, after you take out enough units, watching them tear apart the remaining North Koreans. It's moments like this that make you really feel like you're in a war and an important asset. The Russian mafia is led by Sergei and his lieutenant Joseph. Sergei is a drug addict, always sniffing and clearing his nose and being erratic. Joseph is the real power and brains, translating Sergei's tough talk into a more consumable form. Some of you may be wondering how the hell the Russian mafia got to North Korea. Well, Russia actually has a history with Korea itself, and it's hard to see but shares a tiny border with them. The Russian mob is very unique in how their faction operates and their goals. They aren't seeking to annex North Korea for Russia or unify it with the South. They don't care about the nukes. They want to make North Korea one big black market to make a whole lot of money from. But on the overworld, they still act as any other faction. They do have bases and perform patrols, but their uniforms are basically just mob-looking street clothes uniforms. They will engage North Korean forces when their territorial lines are crossed. They occupy eastern Pyongyang, Pyongyang being the capital of North Korea. Pyongyang under the real regime is a bit of a model city. It's the capital of the country and has full priority over the rest of the country. It acts as a reward for the most loyal and devout people to the regime. Therefore, it acts like a privileged city, a beautiful city that's very clean and has amenities the rest of the country doesn't have. But the mafia has turned this section of the city into a complete dump. There is Russian graffiti everywhere, shattered glass, and rundown buildings. You may think that would be normal in war, but the devs went out of their way to depict East Pyongyang especially messed up. This makes sense because they're not there to annex or nation build. They are here to exploit and, more importantly, sell to people. The main way for the mob to sell you assets is through menace.ru, which is a super sketchy website you can find on your PDA. Through this website, you can buy anything you could ever need. Running low on ammo? Menace.ru. Need a ride? Menace.ru. Want to airstrike something? Menace.ru. When it comes to airstrikes, it's not actually the Russians doing the airstrikes, but they facilitate communications between you and the other nations. I don't think this aspect of calling in supplies, vehicles, and airstrikes can be truly expressed unless you play the game. This makes it feel like you're truly playing the role of a mercenary, strengthening your relationship with different factions to get rewards. The way the helicopters fly in to give you supplies during battle feels really realistic and cinematic. And it's not like the NPC enemies just stand there watching this happen. Like any real war zone, they'll start firing on the vulnerable supply helicopters and may destroy them, basically wasting the money you just paid. It makes you think more tactically, both for what you're calling in, but also when you are calling it in and under what circumstance. You initiate a purchase by popping a smoke in an area where it can be dropped off, and they'll quickly deliver you the goods. But you can't call any of that in if you're being jammed by enemy forces with their jamming vehicles. That part is cool too, because sometimes you launch yourself into a huge fight thinking you could just call in a bunch of backup, and your plans get stifled by their well thought out defenses. As far as small arms go, there are tons of weapons. Assault rifles are basically AK-47s, and carbines are basically M16s, and both of them are the most common guns in the game. But there are sniper rifles and RPGs too. Better weapons are expensive though. The common North Korean soldier is carrying an assault rifle and can be easily obtained anywhere in the game. The trade-off is it's less accurate than the more expensive guns like the advanced rifle. The same goes with an RPG, which is a rocket-propelled grenade and very powerful but inaccurate. If you want a heat-seeking anti-vehicle weapon, you'll have to pay for it. But my playstyle was living off the land, taking guns and vehicles from my enemies around me, so I rarely ordered any guns. But it's this dance with deciding if the juice is worth the squeeze in terms of ordering weapons or just picking up scraps around you. If you always go cheap, sometimes certain battles or engagements are going to be much tougher. When you really needed that RPG to land on that tank and it goes off in a different direction when you could have used a more expensive American variant, you'll really feel the difference. The options with vehicles is just as varied. Through the Russians, you can order all sorts of stuff like different vehicles, APCs, tanks, a simple civilian car for cheap transport, or even helicopters. A big aspect to this game is hijacking vehicles, even when they're occupied. Usually any vehicle in range with a single occupant will have a small circle around it with a hijack point. You press the appropriate button on the hijack point and a really badass animation plays out where you take out the driver and steal the vehicle. I would actually do this not only because I needed a ride, but sometimes it was the only way to stop a tank from killing me. All I had left was a small gun with bullets and no anti-tank weapons. Or I was low on health and I just needed to hide in some armor for a bit. The vehicles in this game feel appropriate for the setting. Normal civilian cars from the Soviet era feel slow and clunky. Tanks are massive and make slow, lethargic movements, yet of course offer huge firepower and armor to protect you. APCs are more nimble and have less armor and firepower, but can transport friendly troops with you and move around much quicker. The main vehicles I was ordering in this game are helicopters. Usually the Mafia variant, because if you had the Korean variant, everybody's going to shoot at you when you fly around. Helicopters help you travel around quickly, but also act as really efficient scouting vehicles when you need to find deck members or just want to explore. They even feel very different from each other. Allied nation transport helicopters are like big flying cows that have a hard time maneuvering but carry a lot of soldiers. Meanwhile, the assault helicopters are super quick and have offensive weapons, but can only take one direct hit from a big weapon, or sometimes not even that, and they'll explode with the first good hit they take. There are also some vehicles you can use and occupy that you can never order because they're just too damn big and immobile, like the North Korean portable artillery batteries. As the game progresses and you do different favors for different factions, you get access to more and more airstrike capabilities. There's nothing more satisfying than calling in different airstrikes on your enemies or to take out buildings and vehicles. And there's such a wide range of options for you to use. Artillery is highly inaccurate when you call it in. Sometimes not even destroying the building, vehicle, or people you intended on destroying. But it's cheap. It's best used when you just want to obliterate everything in an area. Maybe you stumble upon a North Korean camp just full of soldiers and tanks. You drop an artillery smoke and will likely wipe out the entire force. So if you intended on catching Deca 52 members alive for the full bounty, Chinese artillery may not be the best choice for that situation. And it's the situations that you're in that dictate the usage of varied airstrikes. There are precision-guided bunker busters to knock out enemy reinforcements. Then there's carpet bombing, when you absolutely do not care about anything in the immediate vicinity surviving. Fuel air bombs, which are just incredibly destructive. Some of these strikes have this crazy animation with like red gravitational pulling energy, just to show how dramatic of a strike it is. Sure, this game is crazy and badass, and I love that, but another aspect I love is the atmosphere. There are funny moments here and there, and sometimes your character makes smart-ass quips, but the game's tone is very serious. The music has a large orchestral tone during battles to show how serious this war is. Then it has ominous sounds just walking around the country outside of battles. The music sells a eerie tension constantly going on around you. Even the sound design outside of the music, like far-off bombs and artillery landing, scattered gunfire, constant propaganda loudspeakers going off in the cities in support of General Song's regime and telling us imperialist dogs to leave. Allied radio sounds like the BBC and talks about deck members being captured and other developments like major battles you took place in. You'll never get the credit, of course, but that's not how your job works. Remember, we aren't here for noble reasons. We're dirty contractors seeking payment. This is a real country. It's not just bunkers and fortresses. This is a place where people live out their lives. There are apple orchards, rice farms, normal civilians just going about their days trying to get by. Even the civilian architecture has a story to tell, though. Many of the common civilian buildings inside cities is the old, very crude communist architecture, focusing on the bare minimum to provide shelter to people. It feels like a time capsule to the Cold War communist countries following the Soviet Union collectivization model. Propaganda posters and signs are also absolutely everywhere, of course. You need to remind the people how great the regime is in case they forgot. Then you're seeing constant destruction that may or may not involve you. Destroyed buildings and vehicles, trash heaps on fire, destroyed infrastructure. And that's how it is in real wars. Not every person is holding a gun and moving into position. There are real civilians just trying to survive by finding food and medical aid. They may not even care what side wins, they're just trying to feed their families. There are loose territorial lines that are sometimes depicted on the map for restricted areas of a certain faction, but that doesn't mean their enemies will respect it. You may feel like you're in South Korea territory, but then you see a North Korean patrol poking and prodding to see if they can take some territory back. You'll constantly see different factions fighting for territory and innocent civilians fleeing to avoid clashes. You can just sit back and watch these battles play out sometimes. The different areas of the game will be occupied by different factions as you help them further their influence all over the country. After the Battle of Kaesong, the South Koreans will stay and continue defending the city from North Korean forces trying to take it back. After the Battle of Nampo, the Chinese will roll in, set up shop, creating a restricted area, and you see them defending it from North Korean forces. This makes the world feel alive and real. Yes, you played a role in advancing their ambition, but actually seeing the changes after your missions is rewarding from a role-playing standpoint. Strewn throughout the game are also iconic locations from the real North Korea. There are fake towns known as the Potemkin villages. These villages are usually placed right at the border with South Korea because that's their target audience. In East Pyongyang, where the Russian mob has turned it into a dump, there's the Arch of Reunification. Built in 2001, it was a promise to the people that the country would eventually unify again. But it was destroyed in 2024 by Kim Jong-un because he doesn't really see that ever happening, I guess. Song's Tower is a massive and pretty imposing looking building that is supposed to be a tower in the real North Korea. The real version is called Ryongyong Hotel and started construction in 1987, but was never finished inside, I guess, and has only ever had a few guests stay there. Resumption of the project has started and stopped ever since the 80s, but I guess the current status is that they're looking for a casino investment group to finish the building and will give them cuts of the profits from a casino in return. The Arch of Triumph was built in 1982 and meant to honor the first North Korean leader, Kim Il-sung, and his role in the Korean independence movement against the Japanese. If it looks familiar, it's probably because it's modeled after the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Whoa, look at this imposing structure. I wonder what kind of wacky things are going on here. Do you have any guesses? Oh, I know I couldn't fool you guys. This is, of course, the Pyongyang Ice Rink. Not much to say here. It holds 6,000 people and is the largest ice rink in North Korea. There are many other iconic locations, but those are some of my favorites that stood out. This is yet another way to demonstrate the devs really doing their research and trying to show this is a real country. Seeing these iconic places are interesting, and in a game full of cold and crude communist apartments, this really stands out. In these open world games, side content can always be expected. There are racing and delivery challenges all over the map indicated by $signs. The first few are actually directly after the first missions you do and only ask you to drive to the next mission area very quickly for a bonus. It doesn't force you to do them, but if you happen to see it when you first play and are curious, it also just so happens to be the next place you're going to anyway. Just wanted to note that's pretty good game design. The collectibles in these games are also some of my favorite in any open world game. There are blueprints, usually containing things related to sketchy weapons or intelligent assets like nuclear or chemical materials, stolen satellite images, or locations of enemy military assets. It's always fun to find these and see what the regime was really up to and where they're hiding these things. Crates are usually the regime trying to hide valuables such as art or other non-lethal things that still have some value and can be sold later. Things like sculptures, ancient figurines, silverware, furniture. I'm not sure if these were obtained through the black market of other countries or they're heirlooms from the Korean dynasties and regimes, but I like to think of it that way. Monuments of the glorious leader can be taken out for a cash bonus. This is an activity I really like doing. You're taking down monuments of a dictator and getting paid to do it. The statues will stay destroyed when you visit the area again, and it's just cool feeling like you're removing the scars of this brutal regime. Listening posts are strewn throughout and can be really hard to spot sometimes. These are South Korean listening posts, which are usually directed towards the Chinese, but they really spy on everyone. It makes sense for any faction to use something like this, but since Agent Buford runs the show for the South Koreans, and he's from the CIA, this makes a lot of sense. Finding these different collectibles leads to a cash bonus, and as you collect more, you sometimes unlock new weapons and vehicles or cheat codes for new skins. There are skins for everything pretty much, but also for Han Solo and Indiana Jones. If this seems random, remember Pandemic Studios was working with LucasArts, who obviously gave them the rights to have some fun with the IP. I have to say too, Han Solo and Indiana Jones actually kind of fits this setting. They're pretty swashbuckling, aren't they? I think I like these collectibles because they just add another pinch of flavor to the setting. Destroying dictator statues, finding secretive weapons or plans, and collecting crates with valuable ancient items. It feels like these are all things that you could see or find in a real war zone. After capturing the Ace of Diamonds, the North Korean forces retreat to the more northern mountainous regions of North Korea, and we've got to follow them. This opens up a whole new area to explore and destroy. You're presented with an entirely new second map, and I think the devs actually made it feel very different. This area of the country is more mountainous, and it definitely feels like it on this map. There are winding roads and mountain fortresses, all covered in artillery and anti-air vehicles. Pretty much everywhere you go on this second map is an ambush waiting to happen. Other geography is just nice to see too, like beautiful waterfalls and more rivers and snow-covered areas. The civilian architecture is also different in that it's more traditional, almost pre-communist civilian architecture. The North Korean forces are also much tougher in this area. This is probably to give the game more difficulty as it goes on, but you could also surmise that as they lose more and more ground, they are trying to save their best troops for the final fight. They wear cooler outfits now with tactical gear and have way more vehicles than the first map. Sometimes you'll go to catch a deck member and there are like 6 tanks waiting for you. That's when you really start to debate whether you want to fight it out or just carpet bomb everything, including the deck member, just to take half the bounty. As you carve your way through Song's regime, more and more of the deck of 52 members you find are up to nuclear dealings. In the first map, it was a lot of traditional military members or gangsters, really just doing petty crime and tasks for the regime. But now you're finding the real bad ones that are helping Song maintain his nuclear arsenal. The final group of deck members are directly under Song himself. The lower lieutenants are all female, part of his elite special forces squad. This kind of reminds me of the former dictator of Libya, Gaddafi. He did the same thing. I'm not sure if this is a direct reference to him or not. We've collected all the deck members except one, the general himself. After collecting enough intel on him, you finally get a clearance from the AN to move in on Song's fortress. This last mission is brutal. It does start off pretty badass. You're in a tank formation making your way to the dictator, but your fellow tank commanders get knocked out pretty quick. As you can imagine, Song's been waiting for this, so he's got tanks and helicopters all over the place striking you from every direction. Making your way through different hardened checkpoints, you come across a prison which Song may be hiding in.
But it turns out it was his father, Choi Kim. He was not killed in the coup. And the reason for that is because Choi Kim was the only one who knew the nuclear launch codes for the all-important nuclear arsenal. Unfortunately, though, when you find him, he has finally cracked from the torture and given his son the codes, which is very bad. When a dictator feels like they've got nothing to lose, they may just resort to, let's take the world down with me in a huge nuclear tantrum. You race your way to where Song actually is, fight a horde of his best fighters until he does the thing. Song launches the nukes. But there is still time to remotely deactivate the warheads attached to the missiles. The tension during this final fight is ridiculous though. I felt so much pressure though because you're timed in this final fight and you see the missiles leaving the silo the entire time you're fighting. You're under the stress of bullets, rockets, grenades, then you see the missiles leaving and just, well, it's great. For a final fight, the cinematic setting is truly awesome. You eventually disarm the missiles so that they'll land harmlessly, and you can kill or capture Song. By this point, there is no way I was only getting half the bounty, so I captured him for the full 100 million.
Above the war-torn landscape of North Korea, where a crisis of global proportions has been averted. Ladies and gentlemen, I have confirmation now that the nuclear warheads have detonated harmlessly in the upper atmosphere. I repeat, the nuclear warheads are no longer a threat. The nuclear fallout will be blown out to sea. But sadly, for the people of North Korea, the fallout from this crisis will continue for years to come. This is Adriana Livingston reporting live for GSRN.
After the credits, you can actually play a new game plus. It gives you the entire 100 million bounty for the Song mission and gives you all the other things you unlocked. It can be fun running it back and using everything at your disposal without caring about the money. Mercenaries: Playground of Destruction is one of my favorite games of all time, and that remains true after my recent playthrough. The destructible environments, huge arsenal of weapons and vehicles, an incredible setting that feels real. It has a ton of replay value because you can approach missions in so many different ways. Although I'm really busy making YouTube content and kind of pressure myself and to move on to the next project, I still fired this game up after beating it just to play casually some more. I haven't played every shooter ever. In fact, I largely don't play them. But this is the best war game I've ever played. A war, to me, isn't just the destruction and death. It's seeing a real country with real people just trying to get by. It's also seeing what's at stake. Both the civilians in Korea and at the end when the nukes are being launched to hit all over the world. Witnessing the war's progression and geopolitics playing their part. An original soundtrack that matches large battles or even the eerie calm before a battle starts. That's all I've got for Mercenaries: Playground of Destruction. Thank you so much for making it this far. I'm already working on the next video, and I'll see you there. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me out a lot, and I can't wait to bring you guys more content. Thank you to my YouTube channel members, patrons, and Twitch subscribers.